All of us can get music now, anything we want, absolutely anything we want, at the touch of a button. No matter how obscure, with Spotify, stuff like that, it's with us in seconds. And that's a great thing for music, and especially for people who love turning up and rustling around the great underground bands. We know so much more about so many bands now, even if I'd say the flip side of that is that our attention spans have maybe waned pretty badly sometimes. But there's still a part of the underground that remains a bit mysterious, and that's how record labels work. How they make decisions about who they sign, what they need from the bands, what they expect from them after they sign them, and what happens when bands just break up or it doesn't work out. Well, today on this episode of the Metal Insight podcast, we're going to tear back that hood. We're going to give you the real insight from a guy that knows it inside out. Today, we talk to Mr. Brian Slagel, the boss of Metal Blade Records. Absolutely unbelievable. Great to get him. Absolutely brilliant chat. I know you're going to love it. So it's episode 37 of the Metal Insight podcast, produced and reported by MetalIreland.com. I'm Earl Grey. This is a fantastic chat, packed with stuff you simply can't hear from anybody else, so I know you're really going to enjoy it. Look, Brian Slagel and Metal Blade, they have been there. He has been there since the start. And the reason we're talking to him is because he's decided to put down something of the history of the label in a new book. It's called For the Sake of Heaviness. And it charts how he started Metal Blade. Things like this kid called Lars Ulrich running up to him in the street with a tape that would eventually launch Metallica's career, and putting out the first Slayer albums, all sorts of stuff, right up to the present day with bands like Amon and Marth, and the ones we're used to like Cannibal Corpse, still heading up the Metal Blade roster. Now, I'm almost finished the book as we speak, and it's one of those kind of, didn't know that kind of reads, bit of a page turner like that, and it sits very nicely with stuff like The Dirt, which I know you guys all own, on your shelves. So this episode, I guess, I just wanted to get a real insight. As I say, I wanted to tear back the hood on stuff you don't usually get a chance to talk about with people like this. So this episode, it's rammed with important insights from Brian, especially if you're in a band trying to get signed or just trying to push as hard as you can. So make sure to listen really hard to what he's saying, because there's great value in it. And after that, maybe you want to leave us a review on iTunes, please do that for the Metal Insight podcast. It really helps. So what is it like to be in charge of probably the most important and consistent metal label of the last 3 decades, Metal Blade? Let's find out from Brian Slagel. And we started our chat talking about those lean years around the mid to late 90s when actually metal wasn't in such good health at all.
Well, I do, the 90s grunge thing was kind of interesting, because I definitely think when that happened that metal was not in a great shape at that point. What people called metal back then, because all the major labels had come in, and it was all that hair metal stuff, and a lot of those bands they weren't even playing on the record. It was all studio musicians, and it kind of became a parody of itself. So it really needed to go back underground and reinvent itself. And here comes grunge to help push it out of the way and do that. But the funny thing about the grunge thing was, we were lucky enough that, we did marketing promotion for almost all those bands. We were with Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and By the Love Bone and Faith No More and almost everybody there. And I loved that music. I thought it was fresh and new and really cool. And it was still heavy music. It just, they couldn't call it metal then. They had to call it something else. But I know all those guys really well, and they're all huge metal fans. Like every one of them, whether it's Dave Grohl or Jerry Cantrell or really anybody from those bands. They couldn't talk about it then because it wasn't cool and you couldn't mention metal. But Billy Corgan's favorite band is Merciful Fate and King Diamond, and Dave Grohl was had his whole playlist at one point was all Metal Blade stuff. So they all loved it, and I understood it. And I never thought that it was going to go away, because the underground still in the 90s, when everybody thought it was dead, was still really thriving. And we had Cannibal Corpse and Guar and King Diamond and Merciful Fate and, a ton of bands that were doing really, really well on the underground. It just wasn't mainstream. And that's where people kind of thought, well, maybe it's going to go away because it's not mainstream. But the underground was still really, really there. And I never really worried about it going away. I felt at some point it's going to turn back around again. It just needed to kind of reinvent itself, and eventually it did, thankfully.
I suppose one of the things, we're in a very different place. Everybody knows what we've been through over the past 15 years with the convulsions of Napster and, your whole model being completely upended. Do you think you're through that now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting. I tend to look at it a little bit differently than a lot of people in the business do. Whereas more people have access to music now than ever before. It's pretty easy to go up and listen to anything you want to hear. I think more people are listening to music now than ever before. And it was just really the industry had to figure out a way to kind of make it work on a business level. And now I think with the way streaming and stuff is going, that it seems like the business as a whole, the industry as a whole, obviously we're part of it, so we float along with everybody else, has kind of figured out how to make it work. And this is the last 2 years, last year and this year, the first 2 years in a long time that the music business has been up. So yeah, it seems like it's moving in the right direction now, and it's I think everybody's excited for the future as to how everything's going. So as am I.
And but that's where a sort of point of tension comes in, isn't it? Because you have bands now that find it harder than ever because of that profusion, because of that spread. Bands are relying on percentages of pennies on the dollar to try and make it work for them. Is it working for bands until they break completely mega? Is it working for underground bands?
It's starting to work now, and I'm kind of and it's hard, and I understand where everybody's coming from in kind of saying, well, we only make 0.001 cents, whatever. But there's a couple different ways to look at that. Number one, we've seen our streaming income is growing by the day, and it's now getting to the point where the bands are starting to see real income from this, and we're seeing real income from this. And people are predicting down the road, not even people in the music industry, but venture capital people and everybody else are predicting that, within 3 or 4 years that it's going to be 5 to 10 times whatever income you're making now just on streaming is going to be 5 or 10 times bigger in by 2020, 2021. If that is the case, which it certainly looks like it's moving in that direction, bands are going to be making more money than they have in a long time. I just look at Metal Blade as a whole. If we're making 5 times more in 4 years than we're making now on streaming, we'll probably make more money in a year than we've ever made, and then obviously that's going to be part and parcel to the band. So I think it's going to be in a good place. Right now, pop and hip hop artists are making insane amounts of money on this sort of stuff, and not just obviously the big ones for sure, but even the smaller ones are making a crazy amount of money on this sort of stuff now. Hasn't trickled down to our world quite yet, because I think us metal labels only got involved in the streaming a couple of years ago because we were waiting to get the better deals like the majors got. But I do firmly believe down the road and really soon this is going to be a big game changer for everybody.
I'm really grateful you addressed that, because I know a lot of people do kind of shy away from the fact that bands are very well, they feel a bit put out at the minute because labels, and I'm not talking about Metal Blade because I don't know, but various labels are reaching into 360 deals and stuff, taking percentages of merch and things like that. It really just seems to be getting incredibly hard. What is your message for the hardworking bands that would just love to get signed and have a break these days? What do they need to know from you?
Well, first of all, we don't do 360 deals or anything like that. We never did. I don't think that's fair at all. And I think that was the labels, the major labels, kind of getting desperate and trying to fix their problem the wrong way. And I think you're hearing less and less about those deals now with the streaming stuff going the way it is, which is good, and that's the way it should be. I think for new bands coming up, I mean, the big player these days in all of this is social media. And, because that goes hand in hand with everything that we're doing. So, you really do need to have a social media grasp out there, whether you want to or not. We tell the bands all the time, if you're active on this, and if you build up stuff on social media, it's going to really help you down the road and actually making a career out of this. But I think the other thing that's most important, I think a lot of bands don't realize these days, is you still got to pay your dues. We find a lot of times you'll find a band, you'll sign a band, they're really good, they start to do pretty well, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, how come we're not as big as the Black Dahlia Murder or Cannibal Corpse or Amon Amarth? How come we're not touring on a tour bus or something? It's like, well, all those other bands started out with nothing. They had to, the first tours they all did, they slept on people's floors. that's just the way you got to do it to make it happen. So I think ultimately, if you really, really love the music, whether you're in a band or starting a label or doing anything, as long as you're really, truly, you're doing it because you love the music, you'll find a way to be successful and make it work.
I just have to ask, are you safe at the moment? There's a lot of sirens going off in the...
Yeah, sorry. I'm in New York City, so it's always a little wacky here. So sorry about that.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's really interesting, because there's two questions that follow from that I really think people can benefit from learning from. You mentioned there about social. I think we all understand that, and I think everybody understands, if you can produce a pretty good, solid list of, tours that you've already done, places that you've been to. But what really is your metric when you look at a band and decide you're making those decisions to sign them? Is it future potential, or is it what they've already done, or is it social? Because you could be great on social and have shit music and all sorts of things. What is your key metric?
Honestly, it's whether or not we like the music, because it really is about the music. I mean, all those other things are very important, and they play a role. But if somebody came to us with a band and we've done this, we did this just recently with a band called Visigoth, this really cool, old school metal band from Salt Lake City. We heard the demo. The demo was amazing. They had no social media. They had no nothing. They had barely played any shows in Salt Lake. They were playing like parties, but it was so good. And what the band was doing was so good. We didn't care. Like, we're going to sign this band and we'll work it from there. So there really isn't, it's nice to have all that stuff, and you certainly need it down the road. But for us, it really comes down to the music. We love the music, whether you've got 50,000 followers on Twitter or 5. If we love the music, we'll end up doing it. That really is the common denominator and the most important thing for us.
And tell me, because you are obviously now at the, you're at the top of the triangle in Metal Blade. You're long established and pretty big organisation now. How close are you personally? I mean, Lars Ulrich are not running up to you with tapes anymore. How close are you to signings these days? What level do you step in at?
Well, I mean, everything that goes through Metal Blade still ultimately has to go through me. So, when we get stuff in, if somebody from the staff brings it in and they want to sign it, I've got to say, yeah, I'm into it. And I mean, I get hit up all the time from, everywhere I go. Yeah. Somebody's always got a demo. So I get hit up all the time. But I'm still really active in that. I still love looking for new stuff. I love hearing things. I wish I could tell you I had all the time of the day to listen to all the stuff people send me. I usually will forward it to somebody else in the company to make sure that, it's halfway decent. But it ultimately, I guess the cliche is the buck stops here, and anything that comes out on Metal Blade, I usually like. So if you don't like it, you can blame me.
And I suppose that then, I was thinking about bands on Metal Blade in recent years that have really, really moved the needle for you guys. And I suppose, and I'm probably a bit behind the times on this, but I suppose the last thing I thought of as a real breakthrough was Amon Amarth. I think they were, in my mind, the last ones to have made the wow transition from playing clubs of 300 to 400 to, huge audiences now. How do you determine which of your bands are going to make the break? I mean, is there a period at which they get a bit of extra juice behind them? And what is it for you that swings the needle?
It's a good question. I think, it varies with every band, definitely. I think it's not just a specific time where you go like, oh, okay, well, we're gonna press the gas pedal harder now than anything else. Usually, you start to feel something, and they eventually get to the point where they've got I think ultimately it's really the team in place, because you do these days need to have good management, good agents, good lawyers, and a good label, and a band that are all on the same page. And once you get a band where everybody's working together and everybody kind of sees the potential for something, that's when we all kind of step up our game a little bit. And that's when you start seeing these opportunities happen for a band like Amon Amarth, where they kind of, get to that next level, because everybody's doing it. There's not really one singular moment or one time we go like, yeah, we're going to go after this or that. It's just really kind of a real big teamwork thing where we all, kind of go to work, make sure we all do what we're supposed to do, and work on making the band bigger. And that's kind of our job, I think, as a label these days. Is it sounds kind of corporate, but we want to build brands. And our philosophy is, if we make the band and the brand as big as possible, then it's all going to work for everybody. They're going to play bigger shows, sell more merch, sell more music, sell more everything. And that's kind of what we do really with everybody. And, you know, at some points you get lucky with a couple of breaks, or something happens like with the Monomarth and they get to that next level.
And just another question just about the life of a band on a label. What happens, because I think people will be curious to know this, you know, you back a band, you sign them, you invest in them, you give them some sort of advance or whatever, and then say either a key member leaves or they just break up. What happens at the label? What are the chats that are had? Have you ever had to mediate or to step in, or does it sometimes do they just go their separate ways? What happens in the label when that happens?
Yeah, I mean, generally, you'll start to see some of that stuff happening. So you'll try to sit down with the band and try to see if you can work it out. In the good scenarios, it works out, and we've had that happen. We had that happen really early on with Black Dahlia Murder, where the singer Trevor left after the second record, just when the band was starting to kind of gain a foothold. And we're like, no, you can't do that. And he left. And we worked on him, and we worked on the other guys in the band, and eventually we got everybody on the same page, and he came back in, and they went on to have a lot of success. And we've seen that happen over the years. But there's also the other times where just, you know, if it's just not meant to be, it's just not meant to be. You know, we can talk so much about, you know, telling a band what they should and should not do, and sometimes they have a lot of outside influences on them, you know, girlfriends, wives, family members that just, you know, give them pressure to like, you know, get out of this business and go have a regular job. And, you know, sometimes that wins out as well. So it really depends on the band. But we always try to keep them going as long as it makes sense for them to go. I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of times there's just nothing you can do. You know, you can talk about it, you can give them the options, but they've already made up their mind that they're going to get out. And unfortunately, we've seen that happen so many times over the years, and invariably, you know, 10 years down the road, you'll see a guy who left the band or a band who broke up, and you'll see him at a show somewhere, and they're like, oh, the biggest mistake we ever made was not doing this, and they're, you know, trapped in a job they don't like and all that sort of stuff. So we always tell bands, like, give it every shot you can. I mean, just try it. You know, I mean, look, sometimes it's not going to work, but at least go for it. And at the end of the day, if you gave it everything you had, it didn't work out, then at least you can go back and say, well, I tried everything, as opposed to getting out too early.
Yeah, do bands ever do bands ever test your patience? I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, there's a tour you might know they should do, or a producer you might think they definitely need and they just won't be told, or, you know, they have so much talent on a demo, but they're just artists and don't recognize business imperatives. Do you ever have to sort of roll your eyes and wrestle with that?
That happens all the time to this day. That's a constant struggle, and that's, you know, but the ones who aren't a struggle like that are the ones that generally become successful. Like, if you ask me, you know, how many times Amon Marth and I had a disagreement over what we're doing musically or producer-wise, it'd probably be zero, because we're always on the same page, and everybody's on the same page, and they're making the right decisions. Sometimes bands don't. It's, you know, sometimes you have to, you know, steer them in a direction that they need to go, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But yeah, that happens all the time, where, you know, somebody will say, we want to work with this guy, we want to do this, and it's like, it's not quite right. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, we'll all get to where we need to be on it. We'll all agree and it'll get where it is. But yeah, that's a constant thing. We do that all the time. And I mean, most bands, though, are really cool about it, where, you know, they want our input and they ask us, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And, you know, we'll have a pretty good discussion. It rarely leads to an argument or anything like that. You know, certainly every once in a while, though, a band will make a decision to do something. You kind of go like, all right, well, I wouldn't do it that way, but ultimately it's their choice.
Yeah, I want to go back in time for a bit. Let's talk about the music a bit more. Oh God, where to begin? You have been so loyal, particularly in the first 10 to 15 years, to, you know, maybe a dozen key acts that you really sort of stuck with from the start. How important at a label is loyalty versus diversity and breadth?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's super important. I mean, you know, I think diversity is important as well. But, you know, we are lucky enough to work with a lot of really great bands who are all really close friends of mine as well. So it's like working with your friends. And, you know, we like to think Metal Blade's really a big family. The staff and the bands, you know, we're all kind of a big family working together. So when when that happens, then yeah, you have loyalty, and there aren't any issues, and you want to work with bands forever. And clearly, bands that I love, that I work with, I want to work with them for a long time. The most fun thing to me is to, you know, see a band, sign them, work with them for a long time, see them be successful. They're, you know, buying houses and cars and having kids and getting married and all that good stuff. So that ultimately is the most fun for us. And we've been lucky enough over all these years to see that happen with a lot of bands that have been on the label or stayed on the label for a long time. But even that being said, there's bands that, you know, we started out with that went on to have good careers afterwards that we're still good friends with too. So ultimately we're all music fans, and I think that's kind of the common denominator.
Let's go back. I mean, I wanted to pick out just one or two really key Metal Blade releases just from my own life, really. And I suppose something that always sticks out for me is when I was a kid in school, and I remember one of the older guys had this copy of this shocking thing called Tomb of the Mutilated. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, I just hadn't seen that kind of gore in metal or heard anything like it either, obviously at that time, a long time ago. But did that, you know, whenever you started putting out Cannibal Corpse stuff, even, I suppose, Eaten Back to Life 1989 or whatever, did you ever think twice, and I'm not talking about all the controversy, I'm not talking about typical gore, I'm not talking about all of that stuff. I just mean on your own sort of moral or sort of, I don't know, just your own sort of moral compass or whatever when you saw the cover of Butcher to Birth or Tomb of the Mutilated. Did you ever pause to think, is this too much?
No. So I grew up a huge fan of Kiss and Alice Cooper, who, you know, we're both really pushing the envelope on stuff, and I'm a big, you know, horror movie fan and all that sort of stuff, and all this, and art as well. And all this is, it's art. It's all art. It's pushing the boundaries. It's making people uncomfortable, which I think is something that needs to be done. And I love doing that sort of stuff. But it's at the end of the day, it's all fantasy. I remember back when, you know, all this stuff was really controversial, when those records were coming out, and people were saying, how could you put this stuff out? I go, look, first of all, the Cannibal Corpse guys off stage are like the nicest, most normal guys you'll ever meet. Like, they are the complete 180 degrees difference of what you would think that they would be based on the covers and the lyrics. They're the sweetest, most normal, regular guys ever, and really easy to work with. But it's art, you know, it's all art. And that's, you know, it's like saying Vincent Price, was he a Satanist because he was in all these crazy movies? No, he's an actor. He's a normal guy, but he's an artist, and he's creating art. And that's what Cannibal Corpse is. And I would never in a million years tell any artist what they can and cannot say. It's up to their artistic vision and freedom to do it. And we've always thought of that, whether it's Guar or Cannibal Corpse, whomever it is, that's their art. We support them to do their art. And, you know, like I said, I grew up liking Kiss and Alice Cooper, so I like stirring the pot a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, you know, obviously I'm talking to you from Ireland. You know, you made a decision to sign Primordial, and that was kind of strange because Primordial, at that stage that you signed them, were not the typical Metal Blade band, not by a long shot in their musical style. What was it about them that you thought, yeah, it's time to take a chance? I mean, obviously, you did that after the wave of the high of black metal, obviously, and they were moving on and things like that. But what was it that made you think, yeah, I'm gonna go for this?
Well, we always diversity is a huge thing here. I like all sorts of music, and as a label, we've always tried to sign a lot of different things, because it makes it interesting for us, and I like a lot of different things. And somebody from our European office had mentioned this band Primordial. We heard some of the stuff, and I said, we really should look into signing them. They're really good, and, you know, yada yada. I listened to the music. I thought this was really cool. It's definitely different. That a really cool buzz going on. So absolutely. And so we ended up signing them. It's been, you know, for the most part, it's been awesome. I wish they would have toured a little bit more, but I understand why they don't. And obviously, you know, we've worked with Alan forever, and Alan is, you know, working with Metal Blade now as an A&R guy as well. So he's been bringing us some bands and stuff. So it's fun to work with him on that level too. And, you know, we had this nice long relationship with Primordial, which has been great. Am
I right in thinking he brought you Darkest Era as well, if I'm right?
Yep, he brought us them, and Visigoth, actually, that I mentioned earlier, and Portrait, and, you know, quite a few things. Tyr and Zephyrum. He's been pretty good about bringing us a lot of really good stuff, and obviously, you know, Irish bands as well.
Do you think that? So there can be a perception. I'm thinking of Cannibal Corpse and things like that. There can be a perception that, particularly death metal or extreme metal, is a bit of a young man's game. It's quite an athletic pastime or job, and there'll always be new people doing things harder and faster. Do you think bands have a shelf life? And I'm just going to spit the bricks out here, and I'm just going to come out with it and say, I'm talking about Slayer. You know, people see Slayer now on tour and stuff like that, and they think, guys, you have a wonderful legacy of music. Perhaps now the time is right to say, you know what, that was a great thing we did. What do you think about the shelf life of a band, or do you think, no, if it feels good, keep doing it?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, in terms of Slayer, I mean, I'm seeing them tonight actually in New York, and I saw them at Chicago Open Air a couple weeks ago. And I mean, personally, look, I'm a massive Dave Lombardo fan, and I would love him to be in the band. But I think Bostav has really stepped up since he came back in. He's really stepped up, and I think he's playing very similar to where Dave was. This is the first time I've seen Slayer without Dave that didn't miss Dave. So I actually think they're playing on a pretty high level right now, better than they have been in the past. These last couple tours I thought have been pretty good. So I think they still definitely have some stuff to give out there. But look, how much longer they're going to continue to do this, or Metallica, or any of these other bands that are getting up there? That's a really, really good question. And but then again, you talk about shelf life. I mean, what, the Rolling Stones are in their 70s and they're still out there doing it and doing it well. So, who knows? I think a lot of that stuff just depends on. Look, if Slayer stops having big crowds at their shows and start going backwards on that, then yeah, it's probably going to be time to call it a day. But so far it seems like they, at least in my opinion, I think they're still doing it at a pretty high level. Not certainly at the level they had before, but it's still there. And the funny thing about bands like that, because like Kiss, for example, one of my all-time favorite bands, I won't go see them now because I can't do it without Ace Frehley. But I talked to so many people that had never seen them before that go see them now that love it. And it's kind of the same thing with Slayer. Like, so many people hadn't seen them before, they've seen them maybe once, and they'll go see them now and they'll still love it. So I guess I understand that perspective of it as well.
You've been there at the start, you're here now. What to you was the most, and I don't mean your favorite Metal Blade release, right? I'm sure you get asked that every day. That's not what I mean. What do you think is the most musically significant Metal Blade album that you really know made an impact on somehow on music? What was the most impactful Metal Blade album?
Yeah, that's a really tough one because there's two or three that I would say come to mind. I mean, definitely Fate's Warning. The early Fate's Warning records, Spectrum and then Awaken the Guardian, have influenced so many bands in that whole I mean, there would be no Dream Theater or a lot of those bands if it didn't come from Fate's Warning, for sure. So they're definitely one of the big ones. But I guess you'd probably have to say Slayer, just because what they did certainly on Show No Mercy and Hell Awaits with us definitely brought that genre to a different level. I mean, if they didn't make that record, because they kind of spurred on the whole thrash metal movement and speed metal, whatever you want to call it, the big four, because they, their records came out, and Metallica had to do things differently, Anthrax had to do things differently, Exodus, on and on. So I would say probably if I had to pick one, I'd probably go for the Slayer records, and probably Show No Mercy, just because that was the first one that came out that really, that opened a lot of people's eyes about how fast you could play and how a U.S. band could be that heavy and all those things.
And final question, because I know we're coming up to the end of the allotted time, but what was the biggest flop or the biggest mistake signing that you made that you thought would be incredible and that just has disappeared into oblivion?
Yeah, there's a few of those, unfortunately. I mean, it's kind of a weird, it's not really a metal thing as much. I'll give you two of them. But we had a band called the Junk Monkeys that we did in the early 90s. It was kind of more of a heavier alternative thing, and they were just way too far ahead of their time, where we did one record and it kind of went away, and just they weren't doing it. They were doing something there that a million bands have done since then, so they were a little bit early on. Trying to think another one. We had two. I guess I'll give you. That's a few. I'll give you one interesting one that came really early. So we signed this band from Canada called Witch Killer in 1984, and we did an EP with them, a 4-song EP that at the time I thought was amazing. And everybody, to this day, people kind of look back on that and say like, wow, that was a really amazing demo. And we thought, they had all this momentum. They were, a really great live band. They looked great. They had 5 great songs. They were about to do another record, and it just, for whatever reason, it just kind of fizzled away. They never really they were trying to make the record, and I guess they had some infighting, and some of the demos we got weren't really great because they had this first EP that was really amazing, and I really thought that they were going to be another one of those bands in the 80s, like, all the ones that the Sun, and okay, this is going to be the next big metal band that we've got. They're going to have this nice long career, and they basically did one EP and went away.
And Brian, I must say thank you. You've given so many of us pretty much our metal histories. It's an incredible thing. There are hundreds and hundreds of demo bands that read this website every day. What is the one thing they need to know from you?
Well, I think the big key is that musically, it's great to be influenced by who you love musically, but don't try to sound like them. Like, try to have your own sound, try to do your own thing, and most importantly, whatever sound, whatever you guys sound like or do, make sure that everybody in the band loves what you're doing. Don't listen to anybody outside. Don't listen to any record label people or just anybody say, oh, you should sound like this, or oh, you should sound like that. Make your own sound, be true to it, love what you do, and if you do that, because that's the way every major successful band is, hopefully you'll end up being successful as well.
Well, I don't know about you, but I find that pretty heartening that a guy who's in charge of, probably the most significant underground metal label still thinks like that. So that was Brian Slagel. His new book, For the Sake of Heaviness, is out now. It charts the history of Metal Blade Records. Really interesting read. On the next podcast, we have some really interesting stuff coming up. I've had a chat with Rings of Saturn, a really sort of strange technical metal band that sound not like anything I've heard in a long time, but they were interesting dudes, so we're going to be talking to them. Lorcan has been talking to Artificial Brain as well, which I'm really, really excited about hearing. So we've got 2 cool new podcasts coming up. If you want to be in this podcast, if you want to advertise in it, just contact us, mi@metalireland.com, and we'll get you sorted out. So from now until the next podcast, which hopefully won't be too long, I'm Earl Grey. This has been the Metal Insight Podcast, episode 37. Over and out.